So are you interested in using glass paint, but you're not sure where to start? Today I want to share with you how you could use Pebeo glass paints to make a beautiful wine glass. And if you stay to the end of this video, I'll also share with you how to seal it so that your work stays beautiful for years to come. If we haven't met yet, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So let's get started. So let's first talk about the paint that we'll be using today. We're going to be using this Pebeo Vitrea 160 glass paint. What's nice about the starter set is it gives you 12 colors. They're 20 mils each. And that's actually a lot of paint to use in glass painting. So you'll be able to do quite a few projects with that. And that gives you an idea of which colors you might like and what direction you might want to go with your glass painting. This is a bit of a more fluid style paint. So you want to shake them up very well before you add them to your palette. And what's nice about these particular paints is because they are water-based, that you can clean them up with water. If you want to thin them, they do have a medium that's meant specifically for thinning them, which I don't have, but if that's something you want to do, I would suggest going out and buying the correct product for that. Because of the nature of glass paint, I wouldn't go crazy with thinning it out with water. I don't know how that will seal or stay, so I would suggest just using the medium that they suggest for thinning, but I tend not to thin it. I'm more than happy just to throw on color, just kind of as it is. I'm going to start by adding my base color, and when you're applying this, I'm going to do this as a very kind of loose brushwork type of finish to it. You want to put it on thin, so when you apply it, you don't want to glob a huge amount on like that. It's not going to dry very nicely or very cleanly, so I like going on with a few thinner layers. And what's what I've realized with this glass paint is you do need to go thin with the layers. The whole point isn't to go super heavy. I usually find the right amount of glass paint is when I come around the glass. By the time I reach the other side, the layer I've put on is dry. And you're just going to have much better results if you just run with the texture that this paint is. If you're looking for a perfectly smooth surface without brush marks, I think you're going to have trouble getting that with this paint. You would probably have to add 3 or 4 layers just to get a more consistent look to it. But at that point, it's probably going to be so dark that you're not really going to get the illumination through it like maybe you would want to. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just adding in a base of white. And I'm just adding just a square marks with my flat brush. And this is just basically be a textured layer that I'm putting in as a background. For this particular one, I'm going to be layering color on color. So that's basically just the technique that I want to show you today. And I like staying away from the top of the rim just because I don't really like the idea of having my lips on the paint when I'm drinking something out of the glass. And this is a personal preference. I don't know how food safe it is. It probably is okay, but I don't like to risk it. So I usually just don't paint all the way up to the edge. Plus it's nice to have a little bit of variation between the bottom of the glass and the top of the glass. And I'm just gonna have to let that sit and dry for a minute. So you can see that from the inside, and as I rotate the cup, you can see that it does have a beautiful layer of color. So any of those areas where I added in a little bit too much paint, you can see it has those little bit of those sharp edges, and those are just taking longer to dry. So I have seen videos of people trying to do this technique, and they want to try to get it perfect without brush strokes in one layer, and that's not really how this paint works. If you're looking for no brush strokes, this is probably not the right paint for you. I wanted just to show you a few of these other examples where, again, I decided instead of fighting the brush strokes, instead I used the brush strokes to kind of add texture and character to my glasses. And this is another one that I did that as well, where instead of fighting the texture, I just kind of owned the fact that there is texture and just created a glass with texture on it. So this area, since it's still wet, I'm just gonna move past it and start around here, just so I can keep moving this video forward. And so now I'm overlapping. And so often I will do a brush stroke one way, brush stroke another one. And again, if I wanted this on deeper, this is also where I could go through and just add a second layer of paint. But the colors are quite vivid. They do darken slightly. I'd say maybe a shade or two, but they're pretty close to what you put on the surface. But just be aware that if you want this exact color, it is going to adjust slightly once you seal it. And I'm not worrying about perfect with this. I'm just adding in some color and trying to get rid of any of those little harsh edge lines that I get by having too much paint just along those edges. And you could also paint down the rim. You could paint the bottom of the glass. I'm not today. But it applies interestingly. It's a little bit more transparent than some of the other paints I've used before. I think it's meant to let color through a little bit. It's supposed to have a little bit of that shimmer. And it's quite fluid. It just has a little bit of a different feel. So just be aware of that when you're working with it. Again, it's better just to do multiple thin layers over one really thick layer. And so the two colors so far that I've used are the Veil White and the Turquoise. Now moving on to the Bengale Pink. I actually did put too much paint in my little wells here. I could have gone a little bit less with that. If you feel like you have too much paint loaded on your paintbrush, just rub it across the side a little bit. It'll give you a more even layer of paint that you can work with. And this is where you can decide if you want really even layers of each of the colors. You can choose to have more and more predominant color. It's really up to you. This is just the background, and then we're going to add in more layers on top. This technique we're using for the background is more like a pixelation technique. You're keeping it very simple by just using squares. And this is something that if you're feeling a little intimidated by painting, it's a great place to start because it's not about getting precious with your design. Instead, it's like I'm just going to add squares, I'm just going to add little spots, and then I'm going to work from there. And you can really use any colors for this. I like to use ones that are a little bit more complementary. Like I like the blues and the pinky purple together, because with blue and red making purple by sticking with colors that kind of work on that side of the color wheel, it helps again create a little bit of color harmony. And so if you wanted to keep it super simple, you can just leave it here. But I wanted to take this a little bit further, and it's going to let it dry for a couple minutes before I move on to the next step. So I should have gone a little bit thinner with a couple of my layers there because I have a few spots in there that are taking their sweet time drying. But I'm going to move on just because I'm being a little bit impatient. So usually whenever I'm adding in a little bit of color, I end up just wetting my brush in my water and just dabbing it off a little bit. You don't want a super dry paintbrush, but you do want a little bit of moisture in your paintbrush. And so I'm going to keep this really simple in my design. I'm going to start by just adding in a leaf shape. And this is where if you wanted more of a stained glass look, you could definitely go in with some of the other options that Pebeo has for this type of paint, where basically it can work like stained glass and you can put in like a really thick line and you're pretty much done. But I wanted to use just basically what I had, and sometimes we don't want to buy all the pieces and parts. Sometimes you just want to start with just a bit of paint and you want to see what you can do with it. So in this case, I'm basically just, again, running a little bit more of that paint along that edge. I'm not looking to fully cover it. What I'm trying to do here is basically create a lighter layer of color. Because on this one here, this is the one that we're basically doing right now, you want that green to stick out. You don't want it to fall to the background. If we put the green straight on there, you would lose a lot of that shape. So what I'm going to do is start by just adding in a little bit of the white, just to give it a bit of a lighter surface. And then we're going to add on top of it. Because some of these areas aren't perfectly dry, I'm picking up a tiny bit of the color underneath. And I should be more patient and wait, but I'm not going to. And sometimes I like holding my hand against the top of the glass. That just helps steady me, just so that I can get a stronger and a little bit more even stroke. If you're new to painting, or this is a really new technique for you, I would maybe try to do this on something flat. Like maybe do a set of coasters. See how you like doing coasters, or just even do something that is on just a piece of glass that you could frame or just paint on just for practice, because it's going to be a lot easier than getting something like this that's a little bit more curved. But I like wine glasses. I happen to have this set of wine glasses that I bought ages ago, said I would play around with and try out these paints with, and that was multiple years ago. So I decided, well, it's time to pull out these paints and give this a try and see what I can come up with. And I did a little bit of research again before I put together this video, because I wanted to try to figure out, so how do these paints work? What are the options? Can you use water with them? Can you not use water with them? And that's what I really like about these Pebeo ones, is because they are water-based and they don't smell. That's a real advantage to them, which is why I like using them for projects like this. Again, I work mostly in the art journal, but sometimes it's fun just to mix things up, try some different stuff. I think it can just help you get out of a rut if you're finding you're ever in a rut with creativity. I feel like I've had a couple of weeks of being a little bit tired and not feeling overly creative. So sometimes it's nice to be able to do projects like this. Just kind of gets the energy back into my painting practice. And you don't have to do them perfectly straight. You can do them as a curved line. Give that a little bit more character. So I really wanted to show you how you could use layers with this paint. It's actually easy to use it with layers. You just need to basically give it the drying time in between. And so this is going to take a little bit longer, but I think it just gives a lot more interest. It makes it more of an art piece. If you're doing leaves, one of the easiest things to do is basically create your line and then basically just do your leaf shapes. You do the one half shape, another half shape, and off you go. And because this one wasn't fully dry, it's kind of pink. That's okay. I will fix that later. And you can also have one that starts at the bottom, and then you could have two different lines going out. And you could even branch out from there too. Like, you don't have to stick with just one shape. You can make them as complex or simple as you like. And since this does take a little bit more time when you're doing more layers and complex shapes, but I think it's worth it. I think the big thing is I wanted to show you not just the very basics of just adding a layer of paint, but being able to really take this a little bit further. And I'm using shapes that I've used a lot before in other art pieces, shapes I'm comfortable with. And so if you've never painted before, I would say try practicing a few of your leaf shapes, maybe a few of your squares and your designs on just a piece of paper first. Make sure you kind of understand what you need to do to get your hand to work in that shape. Brushwork at the beginning can feel really challenging. It's not that it's super, super hard, but it's more like it takes a certain amount of muscle memory and practice that maybe your hands haven't experienced yet. And that can sometimes make it feel like it's too much. I remember when I first started doing brushwork, when I'm never going to get this. This is so hard. And then after a while, as I continued to work on my brushwork, I was amazed how quickly I got better at it. But it's just getting through that learning curve of, well, this is kind of hard at the beginning. And how am I willing to practice to get better at it? Because I don't think it's something that you either have talent or don't have talent. I think it comes down to, do you have the interest? Do you want to learn how to do brushwork? And because I really did, it was amazing just how much I improved as time went on. So if it feels hard, don't give up. Just keep trying. And eventually you'll get better. And it's just a time thing. It's a time thing more than anything else. And so some of these really light ones, I'm going back over and putting in like a second coat, making it like a little bit darker. So a lot of these ones are already dry. I'm putting it on earlier. And I would suggest not putting too much paint in your palette at once. That was the mistake I made today, is I poured out a little bit too much, and now it's drying out before I have a chance to apply it. So that's our first layer of paint, and that's just going to make everything else a bit brighter once we add in our other colors. So we're not done this at all at this point. We're going to add a few more layers, but I want to let this fully dry before we move on to adding more layers. So you can see, now that we've let this dry, now the white is looking a lot better. And now what I'm going to do is do a mixture, a little bit of the green, wash your paintbrush, dab it off mostly dry, and then just grab a little bit of that white color. Now we have this lighter green. Because you may want something that's a little bit more opaque, like what we want to do here. And in that case, it almost works better just to pull a little bit of two colors together and just see what you can get. And I find the gloss paint doesn't stay super thin on your paintbrush. I almost feel like you have to clean it off a bunch of times just to kind of get it to stay looking nice. But now we're getting in a lot better color there. And you find that's a little bit too contrasting. If you want to stick almost a little bit more color harmony with this, what you can also do is bring in a little bit of the blue. What the blue does is, again, it changes that tone a little bit. And go back in with a little bit more of that green. That almost fits better with our background color, just because with adding in a little bit of that turquoise, that can make a difference. And you can also just add it to one side and then add the lighter green to the other, depending on where you want to go with this. I like adding in several layers of paint, so I think I'll just start going with that deeper color that has more of the turquoise in it, and then I'll probably come back in and add in some highlights, just using that lighter green. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, if you could just click that like button. By clicking on that like button, that just helps other people see this video, and that just really helps small channels like me. So thank you so much for your support. And it might not seem like the white's making a big difference, but it really is. Like, if you were to go over these areas without that little bit of that white in behind, this would come out way darker and you wouldn't be able to see it. And I learned that actually from my first one that I did, where I wanted to add more layers, but then didn't quite have enough contrast between the leaves and the background. And this is a fairly busy glass. Like, you could really simplify this You could have stuck with much lighter colors for the background color, and that would also help these colors stick out a little bit more. Like, for example, if I'd use like a yellow and then put the green over top, that would have stuck out really quite nicely. But I kind of wanted to move in with these particular tones. And because I'd already done another glass, I kind of wanted to have a matching set. Yeah, and I like practical art projects like this too, where you can maybe make gifts with these to give to people you care about. Or this way you could always have a perfectly unique set of wine glasses to serve when you are entertaining or whatever. I think this project has a lot of options. It's also a fun way of having a different way of doing some painting practice. It's a fun way of just using your art skills in just a slightly different way. Because I love making wall art. I love working in my art journal, but sometimes it's nice to do something that's a little bit different and just kind of see what you can learn from the experience. And often if I'm trying to have a nice fine tip at that leaf, I will start at the top and work my way down. This gives you slightly better control. And then sometimes I like to have my hand on top of my other hand. This might look a little bit awkward, but this way I have a little bit better control when I'm trying to get in those details in like one stroke and not have my hand woggle. I'd love to say I'm steadier than I am, but I'm not. So instead of having it possibly go sideways, instead I am just going to find a place to anchor my hand. That's why sometimes if you've watched my videos, I often have my pinky out. It's a habit I picked up from painting on a easel, where sometimes I'll anchor my pinky somewhere along the easel, and that just helps me gain just a little bit more control when I'm trying to add in details. I don't do it all the time, but I do it occasionally when I'm working on a really tiny area where I'm trying to have better control of my brush. So I'm going to come in and just add in the rest of my blue to this little area of green. So I want this a fairly dark blue-green. And I'm going to start adding in little shadows. And I want that just a little bit darker, so I'm going to come in with a little bit more turquoise. A little bit goes a long way with this paint. Don't just dump out the whole bottle. Get yourself a little palette like this and just drop a little bit in, because by the time it actually stops dripping, you'll have lots of paint. Yeah, so I'm doing kind of the bottom parts of the leaves because I'm assuming the light's coming from the top. And this is where it's fun because you can start getting more painterly strokes in there. And it's only along the one side I'm adding that paint detail in. So I'm also going to put on a tiny bit of black and a little bit of white. I'm going to try adding a few more highlights and dark spots in here. Just try to give us a little bit more definition. And so I'm going to go with a liner brush. And what's nice about a liner brush is you get that really fine point. So that's great for adding in little details. There you go. So if you want more details in there, you just add in a little bit of black. And you can really decide how many details or lack of details you want in a glass like this. Because I did have a fairly busy pattern, I am moving on with a few more details than what I normally would use, just to help this stick out a little bit more. But now I'm going to add in a few light areas again. And I'm just trying to decide if I want to add in a little bit of the green into that, or if I just want them straight white. I'm going to try a little bit of both and see what I like. So in this case, this is a little bit darker than my other one here. It's a different look. This one I ended up going a lot with the white. With this one, I'm going more with the dark. It really comes down to your personal preference of what you think you might like for your wine glass. But I think this one's good where it is. I like that the colors are complementary. You can see the leaves, but you don't miss out on a lot of that background. If I really wanted to bring those leaves a little bit more to the forefront, the other option with this is that you can always take a little bit of the white and in areas, add in another layer of pixelation. And because you're adding that right there, now you're seeing a lot more of that definition there, right? So there's a lot of these areas here that are darker where you could mix it with a little bit of a lighter color and just mix the colors together, and then I just lighten that up a little bit. Kind of depends on what you're looking to do. I don't necessarily care to do that today, but that is an option. If you ever find you're in a situation where the color's falling a little bit too far from the background. The other option you could do is actually outline each of these leaves either with black or with white. So you could add in areas like this just to give you a little bit more definition. I don't really feel the need to go totally crazy outlining everything. It kind of depends on personal preference. And then realize that anytime you make a mistake, it can be corrected. For example, I had some issues at the bottom of the wine glass with having some paint that just stuck to my fingers. So all you need to do is basically take your piece of paper towel, take a little bit of water to it and wipe it away. You can also use your fingernail to wipe it. As long as you haven't sealed it, you can still work and remove things. I've even had wine glasses that I was halfway through, didn't like the design, took some water and just gave it a good scrub, and most of the paint came off. So let's talk about how to seal these. How do we get them so that we can wash them, we can use them, and not worry about the paint coming off? It's really easy. Put it on a pan, put it in your oven at 140 Celsius, 325 Fahrenheit. One thing I would suggest is make sure your oven is up to temperature. I've noticed there's been some postings and some people saying, oh no, just throw it in when it's cold and heat it up. And what I find is that my oven will go crazy throwing in as much heat as possible to get it up to that temperature that you want to reach. And so by putting in the glasses at that time, I'm worried that they're actually going to shatter or break, or it's going to burn the paint. So I always let it get fully up to temperature. I slide them in. You might find there's a tiny bit of smell as they cure, and it's very little bit. If you're worried about the smell, just open a window and just finish letting them seal. And then I usually very carefully take the pan out. They're going to be very hot when you first take them out, and just let them cool. And then after that, you can use them. They can be hand washed. I only hand wash mine just because I want them to last a long time. I'm not sure if you can throw them in the dishwasher. It's not something I have personally tried, but it's something you can try yourself if you're willing to kind of take that risk. Usually after I've spent all the time putting together my beautiful glass, I don't want to destroy it by having it go through maybe a bit too much abrasion. But I do find hand washing, it's completely fine. They hold up really, really well. This is one that I've actually used several times and I haven't had any issues. The color will darken slightly after being cured in the oven, but just be aware of that when you're adding your paint. And so I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope this is giving you a really good idea on how to use glass paint. It doesn't have to be really hard. It's just being aware of certain things, learning how to cure, figuring out what you need to do to kind of get the final result that you're looking for. And if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like it and subscribe and just hit that notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you'd like to see another one of my videos, click here. This one, I'm going to let the algorithm choose your next video. And I would love for you to leave in the comments which one it chose for you. So I'll see you in that next video.